Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congressman Royce. Thank you for your leadership. All right, moving on to questions. Mike, you have one now.
Thanks to the panelists and thanks to all our speakers. It seems to me that the problem that has arisen in some quarters of the U.S. government is that the message they're getting from the Chinese is the world's going to end on January 14th if Taiwan wins. And I agree with Sarah and the others about needing a plan B. What do we do as a country? Getting immediate responses, immediate congratulations is important. But what I think is really even more important in the longer term is as the United States and other actors in Asia are trying to build new regional economic and security architecture for the region, that Taiwan be folded into it. Because otherwise Taiwan keeps being on the edges and needing, therefore, it seems to me, to lean, so it thinks, on the Chinese economic side as well as on their security side. So it seems to me those are questions that I'd like, if anybody has any comments on that. But I do think this pivot towards Asia, which some people call a pirouette, but let's say pivot, is important. And there's certainly been a lot of good language about the building of these regional economic and security architecture. But Taiwan seems to always fall off the edge. And I think integrating Taiwan is going to be important for Taiwan's long-term future. So I'd like to hear
Great. Mike, I think I'm not a big sports person, but I think in basketball you pivot, not pirouette. So given our president's interest in basketball, we'll certainly stick with the pivot. But I would love to turn this over to, we have a great depth of experience on a number of matters relating to this. So turn it over to our panelists. Who would like to start? Julian? You're looking up.
Well, you know, I'm an outsider too, because there are more people in this room who know what's going on in Washington than I do. I just live a few miles to the south. But I take Mike's point quite seriously. I mean, clearly the Trans-Pacific Partnership has an opening for Taiwan, it seems, because of the rules of the game that have been laid out for that free trade agreement. And I think President Ma has indicated some long-term interest in that, but why he doesn't take a stronger and more imminent position, I'm not clear, because it seems just exactly the sort of thing that could incorporate Taiwan if the U.S. was willing to do it. I know the Japanese are still having trouble getting their minds around the rules of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and South Korea too. So there are some openings there, and I agree that the language that Secretary Clinton used in her speech, which was really a remarkable rethink of U.S. Asia policy, was very, very open to, very, very user-friendly for Taiwan. But it remains to be seen just what actually can be done.
Louisa?
Yeah, one point I've been hearing that applies especially to these multilateral forums is that it gives an opening for Taiwan's diplomats not only to be needing to understand and touch base with American power centers, the Congress, what is the administration thinking, but counterparts. I mean, the TPP has 8 or 9 members, and that's an opportunity for Taiwanese to have their own bilateral discussions with the economics ministries and trade ministries in the region, and in that way strengthen additional cross-cutting ties when there's something like TPP on the table. So that's an opening, I think, for the Taiwanese to bolster their own set of network of support and understanding.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mike, when we talk about these multilateral things, and then we still end up, I think for the most part, thinking of it as U.S.-China, U.S.-Taiwan. As I've traveled some through the region, it has really struck me over the course of the past few years how people in the region are changing the way that they are talking about China. Yes, there is a lot more economic engagement in the region, but as that is going on, we have been hearing people being more willing to speak up with their concerns about what a rising China means, what China's assertiveness and sometimes its aggressiveness means for economic opportunity for other countries and for their own standing. And I think that probably opens up some opportunities for Taiwan. I recognize that for any country there's only so many things they're willing to sort of poke China about, but I think that regional concern should create some opportunities for Taiwan to engage in the region. Dr. Wu?
Thank you. I think both Garrett's and Mike's question seem to be asking for American perspective, even though I'm from Taiwan. But I would like to offer a little bit of Taiwan's perspective to make our consideration a more comprehensive way. Garrett was asking what U.S. government can do in order to make sure that the peaceful transfer in Taiwan's elections or the post-election period can be a peaceful one. I think actually what the United States can do is quite a lot, but small steps can be very important. Small gestures, small statements congratulating Taiwan's democracy, or sending special envoys to Taiwan, or state in a very strong way that the United States is behind Taiwan's democracy. These kinds of things can be very assuring to the Taiwan people who support Taiwan's democracy, and that can also discourage those anti-democratic elements in Taiwan that they will have no opportunities to take because the United States is behind Taiwan's democracy. And on the trend of Taiwan fitting into the overall strategic picture of the United States in East Asia, I think the U.S. role in East Asia has started to be seen as changing, particularly after the crisis over the Korean Peninsula. The United States is strengthening its alliance with Korea, strengthening its alliance with Japan, strengthening its alliance with Vietnam and the Philippines. And in all this process, Taiwan seemed to be an exception. And one prominent scholar in the Washington, D.C. has been saying that Taiwan is an exception in this kinds of direction. And we have to ask, from Taiwan's perspective, why Taiwan is acting in a different way than other Asian democracies or Asian allies of the United States. And sometimes we have to wonder whether we have been leaning too much to China and making other people feel that we are asking China for help on every ground of what Taiwan needs, or whether we are considering the United States as the most important ally of ours. And I think that kind of balance needs to be considered in a very careful way. And if we let our American friends feel that we've been leaning too much toward China, I wouldn't say that decision makers in Washington, D.C. would consider that as a good step to make Taiwan to fit into the overall picture of American strategic posture in East Asia. Let me give you some of my own considerations on our strategic calculation in beginning from the year 2008. Whenever we have any major problems, personally strongly feel that the current government always go to China first. For example, if there's a crime problems, they think that China may be the one who can help Taiwan to solve the crime issue. When Taiwan's economy is on the decline, they thought that China is the country that can help Taiwan's economy. When the tsunami and nuclear crisis took place in Japan, the current government in Taiwan felt that China is the country to go, and they want to sign a agreement of nuclear safety with China. And I think this is presenting a different picture to the American audience, that Taiwan doesn't seem to take the United States that seriously. And my own perspective is that the United States is the most important country for Taiwan, and we have to take American calculation and American decision making and American strategic deployment in East Asia so that Taiwan can fit into that overall picture, so that the United States will continue to stay behind Taiwan's democracy.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir?
Yeah, let's back to the Taiwan election again. Now we talk about a fair election. It strikes me, if you compare the ruling party and opposition party in terms of their resources, it has tremendous difference. I heard that the last year alone, the KMT has the investment interest alone $2.9 billion. While the opposition party has raised funds through the three piggy bank movement. In terms of their unequal footing, it doesn't assure me the election is fair. And other small party obviously, really out of this, their resources to fight this big KMT giant, monster. So how can we ensure maybe in the future that Taiwan election indeed every party will be standing on the equal footing in terms of their resources?
That's a challenge we face here in the United States too. I think, Julian, if, in some ways you're the most neutral of the person. I don't mean that people have taken positions, but I'd like to defer both to Sarah and to Louisa to talk about sort of standards of free and fair elections. But start maybe, Julian, if you have some observations that you'd like to add to this.
Yeah, I think when we talk about free and fair elections, we too often just think of what happens on voting day. And of course, Taiwan's voting procedures are world class, and they export that election technology to other countries. But as the questioner said, the biggest issue is really elsewhere, and it has to do with the lack of a level playing field. And this is an internal issue in Taiwan that has been under discussion for years. I mean, if not decades, going back to the 1990s. And it's very disappointing that the current government, and especially President Ma as chairman, has not followed through on promises that he has made, even in the last presidential campaign, to sell off these KMT assets, which are widely regarded as unfair, if not illegally acquired. But these are very, very difficult internal issues that involve Taiwan politics. Hopefully, if the legislature is more evenly balanced in the next election, after this next election, there'll be some progress on this front. But I think Joe and those of you who are in Taiwan can speak about this more authoritatively.
Joe, anything you want to add, and then we'll ask Louisa and Sarah. No? Okay. Louisa?
Yes, well, that's a feature of competition, that a free electoral environment will allow different parties to gather different resources depending on to whom they appeal and their own competence and so on at raising resources. And as you yourself pointed out, money isn't the only thing. The DPP did a good job turning that particular point to their advantage in popular appeal, because after all, you need votes, not dollars, to get elected in a democracy, not money. But nonetheless, there is an issue with the question of unbiased and consistently applied campaign finance rules, and what does the party law say? The specifics of which I know nothing, but that's an institutional reform issue to enable fair rules, not a level playing field where somehow there has to be, even treasury or even bank accounts, but equal application of rules is absolutely a reform agenda that, again, I think civil society is in a good place to try to put forward reasonable proposals that, of course, may well need a legislative action as well. But again, there has to be awareness raising that is seen to be outside a purely partisan context.
Sarah?
I would generally agree, I think, with Louisa and Julian, and I myself am not an expert on campaign finance laws in general or in Taiwan. One of the things, and of course, I think what Louisa struck about, whatever the laws are, it's very important that the entities and the institutions that are responsible for monitoring that these laws are complied with are doing the job they need to do. And I think that is one of the important elements of the monitoring and the process of taking care of the election. I think the other thing, and actually, not to discount the concerns of, unfairness in certain aspects with related to issues of campaign finance is what that impact actually is on voters, and Taiwan, and where you place that in the context of the overall management of the election. And again, not to downplay the importance of having proper campaign finance laws and that they be really adhered to. But Taiwan is an interesting example of situations where, whether it's issues, allegations of vote buying, or even the kind of disparities that you see between the DPP and the KMT, and Taiwanese voters still voting based on what they think is the candidate that they would really support. And that's where the broader environment of the elections, and whether there's an environment of coercion or not, or a sense that, whether you're given money or not, you go into that ballot, that booth, and you can put whoever's name you want on that ballot, and it's your right, and you feel that there's no one looking over your shoulder, or in some way that you're going to be punished because that was the way you voted. I think in terms of just the standard of the way the procedures in elections have gone in Taiwan has been able to counteract that a little bit. But certainly, whether it's that or other legacies, and in terms of the whole issues of transitional justice, those are things that would be very nice to be able to see more progress on, both on the legislative and especially in a bipartisan or nonpartisan dimension, as well as on the part of civil society. And there are a lot of people in Taiwan who are looking, would like to move forward on that. Sometimes some of the gridlock and the partisanship makes it a little bit difficult, as well as the fact that it's a very difficult issue for any country to deal with.
Yes, campaign finance reform needs to be done in a lot of places, and it is very difficult to get a party that has the resources to be willing to give up some of the resources. I think we've had some excellent answers, and I would also add the importance of transparency in any of this. That sometimes when you can't control spending, you need to be able to have some mechanism where the public can see what is being spent where. As my former boss always says, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Any other questions that we have? Yes?
I am Delilah. I'm a graduate student at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. And, my question is, I think we are now seeing that, on the one hand, China is trying to exert its influence on Taiwan in every aspect, like economy and, like you said, crime problem. And we have, on the other hand, on the other side, America and Taiwan, developing Taiwan's democracy and trying to, present its democracy as a model to China. But what do you think? I would greatly appreciate if the panelists would give us your interpretations of how the outcome of the Taiwan election next year would influence the result of the tug of war between America, China, and Taiwan. Thank you.
Wonderful. Who wants to start? I'm going to call on somebody if nobody volunteers. Julian, I'm going to go to you again. You keep looking up. That's your
Yeah, well, I suppose there is a tug of war going on. It sometimes gets a little strange because it seems to be all tugging in one direction and not in a very helpful way. Yeah, what to say about that? I mean, clearly, from the U.S. perspective, especially among the policy community, there's been a lot of attention paid to Dr. Tsai's China policies, and looking forward to see how that would play out if she were elected. I don't think that is as big an issue inside Taiwan as it is here in Washington, but trying to sort out where the DPP would go with China policy, given how far advanced that integration has become in the last 3.5 years, I think is one of the big question marks for a lot of observers of this election. And I think so far the signs have all been very reassuring about her moderation, about her pragmatism, about her willingness to work with the existing agreements and to move beyond those where it's helpful, and perhaps to correct some excesses or some other issues with the current agreements. I don't think there's been any indication that she has denied that she would tear up the existing agreements that have been signed by the Ma administration. And that, but there's still some uncertainty, quite candidly, about how that's going to play out and how Beijing would react. But beyond that, I think the ongoing tug of war is really, as we're talking today, more about the competition between the kind of political systems that are played out on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. And I think we're all hopeful here, at least, that the gravitational pull is in the direction of more openness and more accountability, and that works in Taiwan's favor in the long run.
Dr. Wu?
Thank you for calling on me. I was refraining from answering either Mr. Chen's question or the question raised by the graduate student. The reason is because many people look at me as partisan, because I used to serve in the DPP government. But I think sometimes when we look at these issues, we probably need to get out of the partisan box and have a more comprehensive picture of what can take place. For instance, when we look at the disparity of wealth in between KMT and the DPP, and my personal way of looking at it is that we need to have a little bit more confidence in Taiwan's democracy, and I'm sure people in Taiwan are intelligent enough to tell what is right and what is wrong and who is better for the country, and that is the kind of confidence I have in Taiwan's democracy and in Taiwan's people. I'm sure no matter who gets elected, that's the best choice for Taiwan in in next January election. And for the overall relations between Taiwan and China, or Taiwan and the United States, or the triangular relations, many people feel that the DPP, because of its tradition, stressing on Taiwan being independent from China, or the status quo being Taiwan is out of China's control, this kinds of thing, and this kinds of perspective is angering to China, because China wants to take Taiwan back in. But if there's differences in between Taiwan and China, let's look at which political party or who is more capable of resolving those differences in a more fundamental way, and that goes back to who trusts which political party, or which political party gets more trust from the Taiwan people in handling the cross-strait relations, especially on those political issues. And no matter who is elected in Taiwan as Taiwan's president this time, even though cross-strait relations has not been the prime issue in discussion in this particular election, and therefore we cannot stress this too far. But as far as I know, people will feel more that the DPP side, because of its original position, will not sell out Taiwan, and therefore it would give the people in Taiwan would give the DPP more confidence in reaching out to China. And let's go back to year 2000, after President Chen was elected. Of course, many people got very nervous because he's an unknown quantity, because we don't know what he's going to do, what he's all about. But if you look at the immediate post-election period in 2000, he proposed some very good world gestures to China, hoping that there can be negotiations in between the two sides, even the political negotiations. And we cannot rule out that the same kind of operation can be done by the DPP in the post-election if the DPP is regaining political power. And look at the KMT side. Political talks has been on the agenda of the KMT government for a long time. But look at when President Ma mentioned about peace agreement in his 10-year platform, or a golden 10-year policy platform, people jumped up and says that, hey, what are you doing? The reason is because public in general cannot trust or have that much trust in the government in going into the political negotiations with China. So if we think along that kind of direction, we might be able to find a more positive direction for the triangular relations. Maybe Taiwan and China can reach an agreement, or maybe the United States and Taiwan can have more confidence with each other.
Sarah? Yeah. I think on the questions that relate, I guess I would say, to democracy and freedom and how this plays out, I think the most important thing, whoever gets elected, is just for Taiwanese institutions to stand on some of the basic principles of democracy in situations where if you do start to see pressure coming from China in various ways. And sometimes, that's their self-correction. There were a couple of cases, I think, where there were, whether it was incidents of individual police officers trying to stop a protest of people who were protesting against Chinese envoys, or Falun Gong practitioners handing out flyers. But then when it got to the courts were like, well, people have a right to freedom of assembly, period. Similarly, when it comes to some of the issues related to transparency, cross-ownership across media, things like that, there is a well-developed set of international standards and practices in terms of, how to balance some of these different values, concerns, and things like that in order to maintain and really protect freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression. To the extent, the continued and very consistent application and standing by both Taiwanese people, institutions, civil society, the government, the judiciary, of those principles, even in the face of any potential pressures that might come from Beijing, as well as U.S. Policymakers, standing by that and consistently sending the message that this is not something that we're going to compromise on, is incredibly important. And I think we've seen lots of examples of that happening. And I think whoever gets elected, both in the United States in 2012 and at the end of 2012, and in Taiwan in early 2012, both for the value of Taiwan's democracy, but the message it sends all over, that's critically important. And it's when you get these wishy-washy messages that, oh, well, in this situation, we're willing to compromise and we're not, going to do this and that, that's when there starts to be a tilt into this direction of politics and relationships trumping the rule of law and principles of freedom and democracy that are well recognized internationally, that it starts to become a slippery slope. So the extent to which, really being able to defend those values and those principles, and just sending the signal that there's no room for compromise on these issues, is a very important step to take to protecting the freedoms that the Taiwanese people have fought so hard for.
Great, thanks. We're waiting for Congresswoman Ross Leighton, but in the meantime, I think she's on her way, but I think we have time to at least start one other question. Oh, we've got a couple back here. Yeah?
Me?
Why don't you go ahead and then we'll take...
Okay, my name is Liu Shizhong from Taiwan Brain Trust in Taipei. I understand the U.S. government's official stance on the upcoming Taiwan election will be no interference and respect the results, and will be willing to cooperate with whoever wins. But I would like to draw more of your attention on the possible outcome, especially regarding this 4 months transitions. Should the DPP's Taiwan win, President Ma, the incumbent President Ma, would be the first Taiwan president who fails to win re-election. And of course, the government decided to move the presidential election 2 months ahead. Usually, the presidential election in Taiwan were held in March for the sake of saving money. But in Taiwan, there's a counter theory that because of so, it also create a lot of uncertainty because it extend the transition period to up to 4 months, which is probably one of the longest transition period in the world, given that Taiwan is still a very young democracy. So, my personal comment is that in addition to ensure free and fair elections in Taiwan, I think there's a desperate need in the scenario that DPP wins, that there's an additional and extra efforts made by the American government and our American friends to ensure a peaceful, smooth and transparent transitions should the DPP's Taiwan wins. So I would like to draw your attention on this. Thank you.
I see that Chairwoman Ross Leighton is right outside the door. I don't know if somebody wants to quickly start answering before she comes in. I just also would certainly say that none of us can speak for the administration or for the U.S. government itself. And some of those questions really, in fact, some of these other questions need to be directed towards people in the administration. But I wondered if anybody has a brief response. And Julian?
It might be useful just to remind ourselves how we got in this position, because the KMT moved the presidential elections up by 2 months. And I'm sure there are many theories about why they did that, but it has to do certainly with what they thought would be an advantageous date for them. And there's lots of detail around that date. So it is an odd situation, and I would have thought. I know people in the green side of Taiwan are concerned about that long period. But I guess at this point we just need to be alert about it and be prepared to respond both here and in Taiwan.
Sarah? Yes.
I would say if there were a transition, it's really up to the two candidates, to President Ma, if there were a transition of power, and to potentially President-elect Tsai, to really manage that. And that would really be a real important demonstration of bipartisan leadership in Taiwan, which is very important. So, I mean, I'll pause here, though.
Wonderful.
Congresswoman is here.
We have the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee here. We're certainly pleased and honored to be able to welcome her to speak. I know that Terry wants to do an introduction.
Thank you so much. Good evening, good morning, whatever time it is. I just want to take a very quick moment to introduce one of the
Foundation's closest friends here in Washington, but also one of the most solid members of Congress in terms of democracy and human rights. This is a chair of the foreign, or you can tell I used to come from the Senate, from the House Foreign Affairs Committee instead of Foreign Relations, Foreign Affairs Committee. Am I right? Right? Foreign Affairs Committee. The chair, who has just come off a hearing today, has a hearing almost every day. Her entire committee staff is here, so they deserve a big round of applause. But more importantly, for our perspective, is Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Lehtinen held not one, but 2 hearings on Taiwan. And she is the reason that the ball is rolling. She's the reason that people are paying attention. She started this effort because she stood beside us more than 2 years ago, almost now, and said, we need to start paying attention to this. And when I am chair, I am going to start paying attention. And here's a just someone who's kept her word on it, who always follows up, but more importantly, she really believes in this. We come from the same place on this, although we don't really. I come from West Virginia. She comes from Cuba. But we both believe in self-determination, democracy, and human rights, and that's why I am proud to present the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and our wonderful friend, Congressman Ross-Lehtinen.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to come speak before you today. Thank you, Terry. You're a good friend, and thank you to the Formosa Foundation for inviting me to address this timely seminar on the upcoming presidential and legislative elections in Taiwan. And as you heard, we just came from a hearing on our Foreign Affairs Committee about election that just took place in Nicaragua that did not go very well. There was a lot of fraud and voter manipulation, and so we're worried about what's going to happen in Taiwan coming up. But I'd like to point out that an international committee for fair elections in Taiwan has been formed to draw attention to this important event being held today. This committee was formed to safeguard the tremendous gains in democracy and human rights that the Taiwanese people have fought so hard to achieve over the past 3 decades. It is particularly fortunate that the co-founder of this committee, Ambassador Joseph Wu, is here with us today. Thank you. It is always an honor. And this seminar is being held to assist in assuring that there is no backsliding in the achievement of democracy in Taiwan. In the past few years, there have been increasing concerns expressed by civil libertarians about such backsliding. Freedom House, in their 2010 Freedom in the World report, and you're from Freedom House, correct? Okay, thank you, Sarah. Freedom House, in their 2010 Freedom in the World report, for example, downgraded Taiwan's civil liberties from 1 to 2. This seminar is being held in part to ensure that free and fair elections, unmarred by outside interference of any kind, will be carried out next month. The January 14th elections will mark yet another important step, an important step forward in the democratic Taiwan's quarter-century evolution from a garrison state under martial law to a full-fledged democracy. When Taiwan ended the unprecedented 38 years of martial law in 1987, few predicted that the island would emerge as a model for democracy, a model for the rule of law in East Asia. But we have arrived at that point today, and that is something that freedom-loving people throughout the world can join in celebrating. Taiwan's young democracy is still fragile, with the first popular election of a president only taking place in 1996. Think of what great advances Taiwan has made. That year, the Red Dragon across the strait sought to influence the electoral outcome, first through threats, intimidations, and later through the firing of missiles. Yet despite that crisis atmosphere, to interfere with Taiwan's democratic institutions and electoral process, that's what they did not want to happen. Well, the citizens of Taiwan bravely went to the polls with their heads held high, and they freely elected their own president. Now, Beijing has not lessened its attempts. It still wants to make sure that they can interfere with this electoral process. And in the years since that first eventful election, they have stopped at nothing to make sure that that interference has been constant and that will derail Taiwan's peaceful evolution into a free democracy with the rule of law. And for that and many other reasons, my colleagues in Congress and I will be watching the conduct of these elections very closely. We wish to assure the people of Taiwan that we want Taiwan to continue to be that vital beacon of democracy, shining a bright light across the Taiwan Strait to the imprisoned people of Communist China. And to our allies in Asia, we want them to know full well that our commitment to democracy in the Pacific is most tested by the degree of our commitment to a democratic Taiwan. Thus, we in Congress must remain vigilant. We must remain vigilant to uncover any signs of continued attempts by Beijing to bully Taiwan or to again interfere with its electoral process. And Terry, I'm proud to announce to you that I am considering holding yet another hearing about Taiwan during the second session of this Congress next year. And the upcoming elections and their aftermath would constitute a major focus of such a hearing. We've already had 2 hearings on why Taiwan matters. And I think that we must hold a 3rd hearing to look at the elections and to see what happened. We in Congress also must call on the administration to refrain from speaking or acting in any way that could be identified as supporting any particular candidate. Doing so would put the U.S. government on equal footing as China. That would not be right. Appearing to ally itself with Beijing against Taiwan's democracy? I think not. And that is why I found the comments made in September by an unidentified senior U.S. official to the Financial Times so disturbing. What did this official do? Well, as we know, any indication that any candidate for the presidency of Taiwan is preferable over another represents not only gross interference in the internal political affairs of Taiwan, but is a violation of our democratic ideals. The U.S. official in question allegedly said that the administration had concerns that the election of the opposition candidate to the presidency in Taiwan could raise tensions with China. Well, this administration official needs to realize that these are elections for Taiwan's presidency, not for China's, which in any event has never taken place in the almost 5,000 years of Chinese history. How about a free democratic election in China for once? These remarks also represent a violation of one of President Ronald Reagan's 6 assurances, guaranteeing that the United States would never pressure Taiwan, would never pressure its people in their dealings with Communist China. As we meet here today, the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, Dr. Shaw, is making an official visit to Taiwan. And while we welcome the first such visit of a high-ranking U.S. official in over a decade, I would like to add a word of caution. With Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections only 6 weeks away, Dr. Shaw should be careful to conduct his activities on the island in a manner which projects strict political neutrality. And if Dr. Shaw is to meet with one of the candidates for presidency of Taiwan, then he should be sure to meet with all of the candidates whenever possible. Otherwise, there is a danger that he will project an administration preference of one candidate over another. And he could also become embroiled in charges of interference in the internal democratic process of another country. Rather than expressing, oh, we're just not quite sure, timidity with regards to Beijing's possible reaction to the elections, I would urge the administration to publicly express support for Taiwan's democracy and its willingness to work with the democratically elected government of Taiwan. Support for democracy, for freedom, for human rights throughout the world remain core American values, regardless of what the Communist Chinese may think. The holding of free and fair legislative elections on January 14th, free of all coercion, will mark a wonderful day in Taiwan's democratic evolution. Taiwan's friends in Washington, of which there are so many, both in the Congress and in the administration, should stand together in applauding this stellar achievement. There can be no retreat from Taiwan's democracy. There can be no abandonment of the Taiwanese values of human rights and the rule of law. January 14 will be the day to affirm these principles and America's shared commitment to these principles. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you to the Formosa Foundation, and I apologize to the panelists for interfering with your conference. Thank you so very much. I need to get back to my hearing. But I wanted to make sure that I came, and I know that my good friend Howard Berman was here earlier. Yes. Taiwan is a bipartisan issue. Let it always be so. That's how we gain new friends. And thank you, Terry, for your incredible leadership. Thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. I love your work.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. The podium is yours again. Thank you.
Boy, she's a real force of nature, huh?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for your rousing speech. With that, I think, although we had a question, we had a question still being considered, and people have been here for rather a long time, and I'm thinking that perhaps we should go to Terry and have her close. I wanted to thank all of you for coming today to focus on this topic. I particularly wanted to thank all of our panelists, Julie and Sarah, Joseph and Louisa. You guys all play important roles out there in the community at large, focusing on these issues. So thank you for all of your work, and thank you for giving us your time today.
Very much.
I wanted to say a special thanks to our moderator, Carolyn Bartholomew. When we had 3 weeks to organize this event after Senator Brown gave the go-ahead with us, and at that time I panicked and thought, how am I going to put this thing together? There's no way I can do this. And the first thought that went through my mind was Carolyn Bartholomew, and how much we needed her right here at the podium at all times, and her calming presence, her insightful comments, her great experience with both Asia and Washington and how it works. So I would like to say thank you so much for that, particularly after staying up all night last night. And then I'd also like to thank every member of our panel, all who were chosen for their great experience and insight in this. Louisa, thank you. The National Endowment for Democracy is the most robust organization in our country, I think, to stand up around the world and say what we're about, what the principles of freedom and liberty are all about, and why it's so important that we continue those principles. And Sarah, I wanted to say to you, thank you again. You were out in Los Angeles last week. I feel like we see each other all the time now. We were at the 70th anniversary of Freedom House. It was the most impressive evening I've ever spent with young people and older people who were talking about their own experiences in Bahrain, in Iran, about democracy, and how grateful that we all need to be and how cognizant we need to be about democracies around the world and how we need to support them. And then, Julian, thank you again for coming in here and sharing your insights, your great experience of having lived in Asia and Taiwan and written about it for years. And always I look forward to seeing your articles in the Christian Science Monitor. I think it's wonderful. And then our very special guest, Dr. Joseph Wu from Taiwan, who has been, first of all, one of the greatest supporters of the foundation and our work, particularly with young people and democracy and human rights. But also, as you know, we could go through the litany of things that he does, but I think he brings a unique perspective to all of us of what's happening today in Taiwan and why we all need to be very focused on ensuring that these elections are free and fair. And I can't say any more than what our speakers have already said. What we've heard here today is a hearing about Taiwan, its democracy, and this election that's coming up in the next Congress. I don't think anything could top Ileana Ros-Lehtinen. I mean, you never should try, but after today, I don't think there is anything to top her. She knocked it out of the ballpark, and she had tremendous support, as she said, bipartisan support from Senator Sherrod Brown, who is a champion of human rights and democracy, and Congressman Ed Royce from California, who has stood right by there, was an original co-sponsor of the Taiwan Relations Act of 2011, and as well as the ranking member of the House Foreign Relations Committee, Howard Berman, who actually was at our very first, our organizing meeting of the Formosa Foundation. So we thank all of our friends. We thank all of you for being so patient, spending so much time with us today. And let's go out there and raise some noise and continue to keep our eye on this election and continue to do the things to support freedom and justice and fairness around the world. Thank you.